This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. In the pre-dawn hours of October 20th, 2016, a house fire erupted at 605 East High Street in Lockport, New York. Firefighters arriving around 3:30 a.m. found smoke and flames largely confined to a single bedroom in the home. Inside that scorched room, they made a grim discovery. The body of 54-year-old Holly Seiler, the homeowner, lying lifeless amid the charred debris. At first, it appeared Holly had tragically perished in an accidental blaze, but as authorities soon realized, this was no ordinary fire. It was an elaborate cover-up for murder. The initial investigation at the scene raised suspicions. The blaze had been limited to Holly's bedroom, a fact that struck investigators as unusual for an accidental house fire. And when the Niagara County Coroner's report came back, it revealed a shocking truth. Holly Seiler had been strangled to death before the fire ever touched her. In other words, someone had killed Holly and then set her and her home on fire to try and destroy evidence. A quiet Lockport neighborhood that thought it was witnessing a simple house fire was now the scene of a sprawling homicide investigation. Authorities immediately understood that Holly's killer had attempted to make her death look like an accident. The reality was far more disturbing. This cozy duplex home, located across from an elementary school in a normally peaceful community, had been turned into the site of a heinous crime. As Lockport police and fire investigators combed through the rubble that morning, they knew one thing with certainty. Holly Seiler's death was no accident. It was murder. Thus began a complex and haunting case. In the coming days, secrets about Holly's life and final hours would surface, including a domestic dispute on the night before her death, and even a second suspicious fire at the same address weeks later. Each revelation deepened the mystery. Who killed Holly Seiler, and why? Holly Ann Seiler was born on December 24th, 1961 in Lockport, New York. She grew up in a large family, one of several siblings, and was known for her energetic, adventurous spirit. In young adulthood, Holly answered the call to service. She joined the U.S. Air Force in 1985, serving her country for 4 years and earning several medals during her tenure. Discipline and dedication were hallmarks of her character, and after her military service, Holly continued to work hard and make a life in Western New York. For 24 years, Holly worked in production at the Dunlop plant in Buffalo. It was a stable, long-term career that spoke to her work ethic. Family members recall that Holly enjoyed gymnastics, water skiing, boating, traveling, running, tennis, and gardening. She was always active and on the move. Whether skimming across the water on skis or tending to flowers in her garden, Holly embraced life fully. Friends and relatives describe her as fun-loving and kind-hearted, someone who loved to laugh and stay busy. Above all, Holly Seiler was a devoted mother. She had 2 children, a son, Caleb Bell Jr., and a daughter, Crystal Bell, whom she adored. By 2016, her son was in his mid-30s and her daughter in her mid-20s. Holly had raised them with love, and even as adults, they remained very close. In fact, Holly shared a home with her children in Lockport. The family lived in a multi-family duplex, with Holly occupying the front apartment and her grown kids living in a rear unit of the same house. This living arrangement spoke to Holly's caring nature. She kept her children close and supported them as they got on their feet. As Holly's ex-husband, Caleb Sr., would later remark, "She loved our children and did everything she could for them." Family was truly Holly's pride and joy. In her early 50s, Holly had also become a grandmother, a role that brought her immense happiness. She doted on her young grandchild and looked forward to watching her family's next generation grow. Relatives say that Holly was the kind of person who would drop anything to help someone in need, generous, empathetic, and fiercely protective of her loved ones. After her marriage to Caleb Bell Sr. ended, Holly remained on good terms with him while forging her own path. By 2016, she had begun dating again, and she had a boyfriend with whom she spent time regularly. Mind you, life wasn't always easy. Holly had navigated divorce and the challenges of single parenthood, but by all accounts, she remained optimistic and full of faith. Her ex-husband later said, "She's saved, so I know where she went," expressing his belief in Holly's strong faith. In the fall of 2016, Holly was settled into middle age with much to still look forward to, watching her daughter and son build their adult lives, enjoying her hobbies, and cherishing moments with her only, but hopefully not her last, grandchild. No one could have imagined that this loving mother and grandmother, a former Air Force sergeant and loyal friend, would soon fall victim to a brutal crime in her very own home. As that fateful October week unfolded, there were signs of turmoil brewing in Holly's life. In the days and hours leading up to the aforementioned fire, Holly was apparently experiencing serious conflict in her personal relationship. In fact, just hours before her death, police had already been called to the Seiler home for a domestic disturbance. On the evening of October 19th, 2016, the night before the fire, Lockport police responded to a call at Holly's address at around 8:30 p.m. due to a domestic altercation involving Holly and her boyfriend. One of Holly's children dialed 911 that evening after an argument between Holly and the man became heated. The authorities arrived and intervened in that situation. It's reported that the boyfriend left the house following this dispute, at least temporarily. What exactly happened during that 8:30 p.m. police call has not been fully detailed publicly. According to Holly's ex-husband, it was a domestic altercation, an argument significant enough that their child felt the need for police assistance. It's not clear if anyone was arrested or charged that evening. Likely not, since the boyfriend was not in custody later, but tensions were obviously high in the Seiler household. This incident would turn out to be a grim foreshadowing of what was to come in the early morning hours. After police left at around 8:30 p.m., we don't know how the rest of the night unfolded inside of Holly's home. Presumably, Holly's boyfriend had been asked to leave or had stormed off following the dispute. Holly was left with her emotions and any physical fallout from the fight. Her children, who lived in the rear apartment of the duplex, were nearby, perhaps concerned about their mother's safety but hoping that the worst was over after the police intervention. It was a school night in a quiet neighborhood. By late evening, the house likely fell into an uneasy calm, but that calm would not last. Sometime in the dead of night, in the early hours of October 20th, the situation turned deadly. Investigators later learned that Holly's boyfriend returned to the property during the night despite the earlier conflict. Whether Holly let him in or whether an altercation erupted upon his return remains part of the mystery. What we do know is that within a short span of time after the boyfriend's return, smoke began to fill Holly's home. In those final moments, some confrontation or attack occurred in Holly's bedroom. The evidence later showed that Holly was viciously strangled. We may never know if she had time to cry out or if the assault was swift and silent. Her children sleeping, or perhaps lying awake worried in the other unit, did not intervene. Perhaps they heard nothing until it was too late. But by roughly 3:30 in the morning, flames were flickering to life in Holly's room, and the killer had slipped away into the darkness. At 3:32 a.m. on October 20th, 2016, a 911 call pierced the quiet night in Lockport. Holly's daughter Crystal was on the line, reporting a fire at their home. Crystal had smelled smoke and quickly realized something was terribly wrong. Rushing toward her mother's front apartment, Crystal was met with a thick haze of smoke. She shouted for her mom but got no answer. Desperate to help, Crystal made the horrifying discovery. She eventually found her mother's body unresponsive amidst the growing flames. Firefighters and police raced to the scene on East High Street, arriving within minutes. They found smoke billowing from part of the house, but this was not a fully engulfed inferno. The fire was contained to Holly's bedroom area and had not spread far beyond. The Lockport Fire Department quickly went to work, dousing the flames and ventilating the structure. The blaze was knocked down relatively fast, limited to one section of the home. Once it was safe to enter, first responders made their way inside, where they encountered a grim scene. On the floor of the charred bedroom lay Holly Seiler's lifeless body. She had apparently been in bed or near it when the fire started, as that room bore the brunt of the damage. Paramedics checked for any signs of life, but Holly was already beyond help. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Importantly, firefighters noted that the fire damage, while noticeable, was not extensive throughout the house. It seemed the flames had perhaps smoldered and fizzled out after consuming part of the bedroom, rather than raging unchecked. This would later make sense as it became clear that the fire had not been an accident, but a deliberate act likely ignited with just enough fuel to do damage but not necessarily destroy the entire structure. In the immediate aftermath, neighbors on the sleepy street awoke to sirens and flashing lights. The scene around 4 a.m. was chaotic. Fire trucks blocking the road, firefighters carrying hoses, police officers securing the area with tape, and a stretcher being wheeled into the house to remove Holly's body. For a while, people assumed it was a fatal but accidental fire, a terrible tragedy, perhaps one caused by a cigarette or an electrical malfunction. Holly's own children were in shock. They had escaped the blaze unharmed. The fire had not reached their rear apartment, but now they faced the unthinkable reality that their mother was gone. By sunrise, though, homicide detectives were on the scene alongside the fire marshals, treating the house not just as a fire scene but as a potential crime scene. Initially, the authorities were cautious in their public statements. Lockport police confirmed that a woman had died in the fire, but as of that morning, they did not announce her identity or the cause of death. Behind the scenes, though, suspicion was mounting. The fact that Holly's children and any other occupants were safe, and that Holly alone was found dead, raised a red flag. So did the limited scope of the fire. Investigators on site began to consider that the fire might have been intentionally set after Holly was already dead or incapacitated. Later that day, October 20th, Holly's ex-husband, Caleb Bell Sr., arrived in Lockport from his home in Rochester after receiving the devastating news. He met with police and, heartbreakingly, had to inform their 2 children that their mother was gone. It wasn't a meeting that any father would want to endure, Caleb Sr. later told a reporter, describing the pain of telling his son and daughter that their mother had died in the fire. Collectively, the family was crushed. Caleb Sr. then did something that Holly's kids could not bear to do at that moment. He publicly confirmed Holly's identity to the press. He spoke briefly with the local media, identifying the victim as his ex-wife Holly Seiler, 54 years old. In his remarks, he conveyed not only sorrow but also admiration for the kind of woman that Holly was. Through tears, he recounted how she loved our children and did everything she could for them, emphasizing Holly's deep devotion as a mother. He also tried to comfort their distraught daughter with words of faith, stating, "Like I told my daughter, she'll see her again. You just have to know it's in God's hands." It was an emotionally wrenching scene on the front lawn of that East High Street home. A family in grief, a charred window in the background. Police, for their part, remained tight-lipped in the immediate aftermath. A Lockport police official told reporters the next day, "Her cause of death and the cause of the fire are both under investigation." They noted that Holly had been the only person in her apartment unit at the time of the fire, and that they had already interviewed at least one witness, likely a reference to Crystal or another person who knew of the night's events. Investigators promised more information would be forthcoming once preliminary findings were in. Few could have imagined just how dark those findings would be. In the days immediately following the fire, Holly's body underwent a full forensic autopsy by the Niagara County Medical Examiner. The results confirmed what detectives had begun to suspect. Holly did not die from smoke inhalation or burns. She had been the victim of homicidal violence prior to the fire. Specifically, the coroner found evidence that Holly had been strangled to death. Only afterward was her lifeless body and the bedroom around her doused in flames. This revelation changed everything. A fatal house fire case had officially become a murder case. Lockport police now had to find a killer who had very nearly gotten away with covering up the crime. With the autopsy confirming that Holly was killed before the blaze, detectives faced a challenging investigation. They had a twofold crime on their hands, murder and arson, and the perpetrator had tried to destroy evidence with fire. Nonetheless, investigators began piecing together the clues from the scene and the various witness accounts they could scrounge up. Forensic specialists combed through the charred bedroom, looking for anything that had survived the flames. Fibers, fingerprints on unburnt surfaces, potential murder weapons or ligatures, the traces of accelerant used to start the fire. The burned remains of Holly's bedding and furniture were analyzed for chemical accelerants. Investigators were also aware of crucial context. Just hours before Holly's death, police had been at this very house for a domestic dispute involving Holly and her boyfriend. This immediately put Holly's boyfriend at the top of the list of people to investigate. Detectives interviewed Holly's daughter and son in detail about what had transpired earlier that evening. Crystal recounted the 8:30 p.m. altercation and how the boyfriend had left afterward, only to return during the night shortly before the fire. This timeline was highly suspicious. One of the first things that police likely did was to track down Holly's boyfriend to get his side of the story. His name has not been released in the press, since he has not been formally charged with anything, but he was an obvious person of interest. According to Holly's family, the relationship had turned volatile that night. Caleb Bell Sr., Holly's ex, told reporters that there was a domestic incident prior to the fire with Holly and her boyfriend. This strongly implied that in the family's view, the boyfriend's actions were linked to what happened later that night. Investigators undoubtedly questioned this man. Where did he go after the 8:30 p.m. police visit? Did he return to Holly's home? And if so, what transpired? Did anyone else see him in the area in the early morning hours? At that stage, police did not publicly name any suspects. Local news station WKBW reported on October 21st, police would not comment on whether there is a suspect in this case. But behind closed doors, the scrutiny on the boyfriend was intense. If he had a violent altercation with Holly that night that required a police response, and then hours later Holly was dead by foul play, this was more than a coincidence. Another focus was the cause of the fire. Fire marshals determined fairly quickly that the blaze was intentionally set, an act of arson. The fire had originated in or near Holly's bed. Perhaps bedding was ignited with a flame or an accelerant was poured and lit. If an accelerant like gasoline or lighter fluid was used, chemical test of the debris would detect it. We do know from later developments, particularly a second fire, to be discussed very soon, that gasoline was a tool used in an attempt to burn down this house. If any telltale residue of gas or another accelerant was found in the first fire's aftermath, investigators likely recognized that immediately as a sign of arson. The public, however, wasn't informed right away. Police were careful not to tip off the killer about what they knew. As they processed the scene, detectives also had to consider Holly's children as witnesses or even potential suspects, something that's standard procedure in a case like this. Holly's son, Caleb Jr., and daughter, Crystal, were there on the property that night. They were the ones to report the fire, and they had a known involvement in the earlier domestic call. Police interviewed them extensively. Crystal, being the one who found her mother's body, was likely able to provide important information. That she had smelled smoke, that she saw the boyfriend's return. There is no indication that either of Holly's children had any motive to harm her. By all accounts, they loved their mother deeply and were devastated by her death. At that moment, though, they were witnesses who could help establish a timeline and suspects' whereabouts. Within a day or two, the case was clearly being treated as a homicide. For the tight-knit community of Lockport, news spread that Holly's death was not an accident. On October 24, 2016, just days later, the Lockport Union Sun and Journal published Holly's obituary, which gave no hint of the violence but honored her life and service. Loved ones gathered for Holly's funeral on November 2, 2016, grieving not just an unexpected loss, but grappling with the knowledge that someone out there had done this to her. As Holly was laid to rest, police continued working the case, quietly pursuing leads, awaiting lab results, and keeping a close eye on persons of interest. Little did they know, a shocking twist was just around the corner, one that would cast new suspicion within Holly's own family. That's after the break. Less than 3 weeks after Holly Seiler's murder, this saga took an unexpected turn. On the night of November 8, 2016, the quiet of East High Street was shattered once again by emergency sirens. There was another fire at 605 East High Street, the very same house where Holly had died. This time, it was not Holly's apartment in flames. That unit had been damaged and was unoccupied since the first fire. Instead, the fire was in the rear apartment, the living space occupied by Holly's 2 adult children, Caleb Bell Jr. and Crystal Bell. And incredibly, this second blaze was no accident either. It was a deliberate arson attempt, and it was quickly linked to Holly's own son, 34-year-old Caleb Bell Jr. On November 8th, Holly's daughter Crystal and a friend went out for dinner at a nearby Olive Garden. When they returned home later that night, they immediately sensed something was wrong. Crystal noticed that her brother Caleb's bedroom window was wide open and a fan was running in the window. An odd sight on a cool November evening. Stepping out of the car, both Crystal and her friend caught the strong, unmistakable odor of gasoline in the air. Alarmed, Crystal went inside and confronted her brother Caleb, who was barely dressed, oddly wearing only the bottom half of a pair of long johns, and seemed startled by his sister's return. When asked about the strong gasoline smell, Caleb Jr. claimed he had been moving gas cans around. It was a bizarre, suspicious explanation. Crystal's instincts told her something was very off. Acting swiftly, Crystal dialed 911 to report the smell of gas and potential danger. She urged her brother to step outside with her and her friend. Crystal specifically warned Caleb not to go back into the basement, where the smell of gas was the strongest, fearing there could be an explosion or a fire if a flame ignited. For a moment, the trio was outside the house, waiting for help. But then, according to what Crystal later told police, Caleb Jr.'s demeanor changed. He suddenly dashed back into the house despite her warnings. As Crystal stood outside, phone in hand, she heard her brother shout from inside, "Fuck, a fire," and saw him reemerge amid huge flames that burst forth in the living room. In that instant, the house had been set ablaze. The second fire spread quickly through the living area of the rear apartment. However, thanks to Crystal's foresight in dialing 911 immediately, firefighters were already en route. They arrived to find flames curling out of the rear unit and doused the fire before it could consume the entire structure. No one was injured, thankfully. Crystal, her friend, and Caleb Jr. had all gotten out by the time the fire department arrived, but the situation was plainly criminal. Crystal and her friend gave statements on the spot, detailing how Caleb Jr. had essentially engineered the blaze. They had first noticed the open window with a fan, an apparent attempt to ventilate gas fumes, then the overwhelming smell of gasoline, and Caleb's own incriminating actions afterward painted a clear picture of arson. The day after this incident, November 9th, Lockport police moved swiftly to arrest Caleb Bell Jr. for the arson. He was taken into custody and charged with third-degree arson in connection with the November 8th fire. That charge indicated he was accused of intentionally damaging a building by setting a fire, a felony offense. Caleb Jr. was arraigned in Lockport City Court, where he pleaded not guilty initially. The case was then sent to be presented to a Niagara County grand jury, and Caleb Jr. waived his right to a preliminary felony hearing. The arson case against him was incredibly strong, given the eyewitness accounts from his sister and her friend, as well as physical evidence. Like the gas cans, he had ostensibly been moving. It appears there was little doubt he had tried to burn down the house. The obvious question on everyone's mind was, why? Why would Holly Seiler's own son attempt to torch the very home where his mother had been murdered just weeks earlier? The timing and location were incredibly suspicious. Some wondered if Caleb Jr.'s actions were an attempt to destroy evidence from the first fire, or cover up something else related to his mother's murder. Others thought it might be an expression of grief or a psychological break, given the trauma of losing his mother. Whatever the motive, law enforcement now had to consider the disturbing possibility that the arsonist's son might somehow be connected to the mother's homicide. Officially, though, Caleb Bell Jr. was charged only in relation to the second fire, not his mother's death. WKPW reported. Lockport police have confirmed that 34-year-old Caleb Bell Jr. was arrested in the same home where his mother died after the house caught fire last month. Within days, Caleb Jr. was behind bars awaiting further legal action on the arson. That month, November 2016, a grand jury was convened to indict him on arson charges. Facing strong evidence, Caleb Jr. eventually took a plea deal rather than go to trial. He pleaded guilty to third-degree arson and in a subsequent sentencing hearing, received an indeterminate 5 to 10 year prison term for that crime. Importantly, Niagara County officials made it clear that Caleb Jr.'s guilty plea was solely for the arson, and he has never been charged in connection with his mother's homicide. The arrest and imprisonment of Holly's son for burning down their house was a bizarre and tragic footnote to the case, but it did not directly solve the mystery of Holly's murder. If anything, it raised more questions about what was really going on within that family in late 2016. With an unsolved case as tangled as this, investigators and the public have grappled with multiple theories about who could have killed Holly Seiler and why. Over the years, 2 main suspect profiles have emerged based on the known facts. First, there's Holly's boyfriend at the time, name unknown, and then her son, Caleb Jr. There are also broader considerations of whether someone else entirely could have been involved. First, we'll talk about the boyfriend. From day one, Holly's boyfriend has been under a cloud of suspicion. The reasons are pretty evident. He and Holly had a serious domestic fight just hours before she was killed. Police were called to intervene, and according to family, this boyfriend was present at the house again near the time the fire started. It's a classic scenario in domestic homicide cases. Often a history of conflict escalates to lethal violence, and statistically speaking, women are most likely to be killed by their romantic partner. If the boyfriend was indeed the killer, the motive likely stemmed from domestic violence or a heated argument turned deadly. Perhaps Holly decided to break off the relationship that night, or the fight became physical. We know police were involved at 8:30 p.m., which could indicate prior violence. The boyfriend may have returned in the early morning, still angry or unable to let things go, and a confrontation ensued. Strangulation is a very personal, up-close method of killing, one often seen in domestic homicides due to anger and control issues. The boyfriend might have strangled Holly in a rage, and then realizing what he'd done, set the fire to hide the crime. The boyfriend's opportunity to commit the crime is clearly established. He was with Holly that evening, the domestic disturbance proves he had been there, and witnesses place him returning to the vicinity of the house during the critical window overnight. Holly likely would have let him in if he came back apologetic or claiming he forgot something, or he might have snuck in if she was asleep. There were reportedly no signs of forced entry reported, suggesting Holly wasn't killed by a random intruder but by someone who had normal access, such as a boyfriend. So what evidence might implicate this boyfriend? Investigators have not publicly disclosed forensic evidence, but one can speculate. If Holly struggled while being strangled, the killer might have scratches or injuries. Police would have looked for that on the boyfriend soon after. There could have been DNA under Holly's fingernails if she scratched her assailant. If the boyfriend used an object, like a rope or a piece of clothing, to strangle her, that object might have been found or have his fingerprints. Since a fire was set at the scene, the killer may have traces of soot or accelerant on their clothing. Did anyone get a whiff of the boyfriend smelling of smoke or gas, or see his car in the area at around 3 a.m.? These are questions that detectives likely pursued. Notably, no arrest has been made. This suggests that either the physical evidence was inconclusive or insufficient to charge the boyfriend, or maybe he has an alibi, or there's some alternative explanation that muddies the waters. It's possible he told police that he left Holly's home and did not return, contradicting the daughter's account. Or that if he did return, it was earlier and that he left again before the fire. If there's no surveillance video or external witness beyond the family, it could have been a matter of he said she said about his whereabouts. Also, any DNA evidence could potentially be explained away if he was Holly's boyfriend. This is the type of DNA that might be expected to be in her home or on her, complicating its value as proof of murder. Officially, authorities have never named the boyfriend as a suspect or even charged him with involvement. Early on, they would not comment on any suspect identities. However, Holly's family did not hide their suspicions. Caleb Bell Sr., Holly's ex-husband, strongly implied the boyfriend's involvement to the media, emphasizing the domestic incident that preceded the fire. Lockport police have remained tight-lipped about both, likely to avoid jeopardizing any potential future case. It's telling, though, that investigators have never publicly cleared the boyfriend. The case remains open, and he remains, in the eyes of many, a prime suspect who simply hasn't been officially pinned with the crime. For the community, the boyfriend theory is very persuasive. It fits a pattern that we're all familiar with, and the timeline makes sense. As one local news outlet summarized, everyone thought Holly died in a house fire. That is, until the coroner's report said she was strangled to death. As investigators searched for answers, her boyfriend's late-night return loomed suspicious. Many believe that the simplest explanation, that the domestic abuser killed her, is the correct one. Until more evidence emerges or an arrest is made, this remains an unproven theory. The boyfriend has not faced any public accountability for Holly's death, and unless new witnesses or evidence come forward tying him conclusively to the crime, the case can't move forward solely on suspicion. But now we're going to transition to the second theory in this case, that Holly's son, Caleb Bell Jr., was involved. The strange events after Holly's death inevitably led to a second theory. Could Holly's own son, Caleb Jr., have been the culprit? This idea is distressing and perhaps a little less likely than the former, but it gained traction primarily because of Caleb Bell Jr.'s behavior. The fact that he attempted to burn down the house 3 weeks later made people wonder if he had a darker role from the start. Was the November 8th arson a panicked bid to destroy evidence from October 20th? Or possibly the outburst of a guilty conscience? Could Caleb Jr. have killed his mother and then staged the fire, all while the family initially suspected the boyfriend? These are hard questions to ask, but ones that had to be considered. On the surface, Caleb Jr. did not appear to have a clear motive to kill his mother. He was not known to be at odds with her. In fact, he lived with her, and she was helping to support him. However, some have speculated about his mental state, if Caleb Jr. was struggling with mental illness or substance issues, both of which have been unconfirmed publicly. It's conceivable he might have snapped or had some delusional reason. Another possible angle is financial or personal gain. Did he stand to benefit from Holly's death, such as an inheritance, insurance, what have you? There's no direct evidence of that. Absent a clear motive, proponents of this theory point to opportunity and behavior. Caleb Jr. was right there at home that night. It is worth noting that Caleb Jr. was 34 years old and still living at home. Nothing to be ashamed about, of course, but sometimes such situations cause familial tension. And again, this is all speculative. Caleb Jr. undoubtedly had opportunity. He was one of only a few people on the premises when Holly was killed. Just him and his sister, aside from Holly herself. If the boyfriend truly left after the fight and did not return, this is me playing devil's advocate, then the only others around were her children. What raises eyebrows most about Caleb Jr. is his behavior during the second fire. By trying to torch the house on November 8th, he effectively demonstrated the capability to commit arson, the very act that tried to cover up Holly's murder. His sister's testimony describes premeditation on his part. This suggests he could likewise have premeditated the first fire's arson. Additionally, investigators have not publicly said what Caleb's explanation was for that second fire. Did he ever confess or reason? Publicly, we don't know. The lack of a clear explanation leads some to suspect that it might have been related to Holly's case. For instance, if he feared evidence in the house that might have incriminated him, he could have tried to erase it with fire. Law enforcement has indeed taken note of Caleb Jr.'s potential involvement. In a 2021 interview, a Niagara County District Attorney acknowledged that Caleb Bell Jr. is considered a person of interest in Holly's homicide case. This is pretty significant. It's an official indication that investigators have their eye on him regarding the murder, not just the arson. Being a person of interest is not an accusation of guilt, but it means he's someone who has not been cleared. The DA's statement suggests that, at minimum, police find the circumstances around Caleb Jr. suspicious enough that they continue to investigate any links between him and his mother's death. Notably, she mentioned this while also noting his arson conviction and prison term. So why then hasn't Caleb Jr. been charged with the murder? The likely answer is the same as the other suspect: the lack of hard evidence. Suspicion and motive aren't enough. Prosecutors would need some proof placing him at the scene of the murder and showing that he, not someone else, killed Holly. So far, such proof remains elusive or confidential. If the physical evidence pointed to the boyfriend, then Caleb Jr. would not be in the frame. If it's inconclusive or mixed, that complicates things. There is also another possibility: Crystal's eyewitness perspective. She found her mother and saw the boyfriend that night, and apparently did not implicate her brother in any way at the time. In fact, Crystal was the one who later helped catch Caleb setting the second fire. If Caleb had killed Holly, he would have had to try and fool or evade his sister that night, which is kinda tricky given they were in the same house. There's no public indication that Crystal suspects her brother in their mother's death. Her ire seemed directed at the boyfriend initially. That said, family loyalties can cloud judgment, or she might just find it unthinkable. From the public vantage, the case against Caleb Jr. is very circumstantial but still a bit troubling. He's proven to be dangerous with fire, and the timing of his arson is too coincidental to ignore. Even within the family, some may have doubts. Holly's sister, Mary, in her quest for answers, has not outright accused her nephew, but she has expressed that not enough is being done and everyone should be looked at closely. Until or unless new evidence emerges, Caleb Bell Jr.'s status in this case remains ambiguous. He was incarcerated for arson, and he has never been charged with murdering his mother. According to officials, he has denied any involvement in Holly's death, which one can infer since he hasn't confessed. The DA's office will keep him listed as a person of interest, meaning that the file on him is open. If one day a witness comes forward or a piece of forensic evidence is retested that implicates him, charges could follow. In the meantime, the theory that Caleb Jr. killed his mother is one of the darker possibilities haunting this case. It's a theory that the community hopes is not true, but cannot rule out, given the bizarre twist of this story. Beyond the boyfriend and the son, could there have been someone else responsible for Holly Seiler's murder? Investigators haven't completely dismissed any possibilities publicly, but there's scant evidence to support an outside intruder or a hired hit or anything of that sort. Nothing about the scene suggested a robbery. Holly's valuables were not highlighted as missing, and the fire appeared set to hide a body, not to cover up a burglary. There were no reports of forced entry, which makes a random attacker less likely. Not impossible, but very less likely. Holly did not seem to have any enemies. She was a 54-year-old grandmother, a factory worker with deep roots in her community. There is no known connection to any criminal activity, no serious debts or disputes that might prompt a third party to want to harm her. If someone other than the two men in her life did this, it would raise the question, who and why? Occasionally, speculation arises about whether two people could have been involved. For instance, could the boyfriend and the son have both played roles, or could someone have helped the boyfriend? Something like that. But there's no evidence released to suggest multiple perpetrators that night. It's likely that the murder was committed by a single individual, given the intimate nature of strangulation. One could theorize about a scenario like this. Maybe the domestic fight ended with the boyfriend storming off, and later a different individual, say a jealous ex-partner or a stalker, took advantage of the chaos to attack Holly. This is highly speculative and not supported by any known facts. Unsolved cases sometimes attract wild theories, but responsible investigators have to stick to evidence. In Holly's case, all evidence and witness accounts point inward, to her immediate circle, rather than to an unknown outsider. Therefore, while we can't say with 100% certainty that only the boyfriend or the son could have done it, those are by far the primary theories that law enforcement has centered on. In the nearly 9 years since Holly Seiler's death, the investigation has seen flurries of activity and long stretches of quiet. Multiple law enforcement agencies have been involved. The Lockport Police Department has been the lead investigative party, with assistance from the Niagara County District Attorney's Office, and presumably some state-level resources. Over time, some aspects of the case have become public, while many of the others remain closely guarded secrets known only to the detectives and the killer. One development came in March 2018, about a year and a half after the murder. That was when Holly's family obtained a copy of her death certificate, officially noting that her manner of death was homicide, aka strangulation. This might sound like old news. We already knew that the coroner found strangulation, but for Holly's family, seeing it in black and white was significant. It removed any doubt that she was killed. Not an accident, not undetermined. Killed. By this time, Holly's sister, Mary Seiler, had grown increasingly frustrated with the investigation's progress. In public comments and to local media, Mary expressed the family felt kept in the dark and unsatisfied with the effort being put forth. In a radio interview that March, Mary said that police in the DA's office were not being receptive to her inquiries, and that nearly 2 years had passed with no arrest. She essentially accused the authorities of not doing enough and begged for more action. This family pressure perhaps helped spur some renewed attention. Not long after, the Niagara County DA did acknowledge certain aspects publicly, including naming the person of interest, Caleb Jr., as mentioned earlier. The DA then defended the investigation, asserting that investigators were actively working the case, even if much of it was happening behind the scenes. From her perspective, just because updates weren't public did not mean nothing was happening. But still, the years began to pass. In November 2020, on the 4-year anniversary of Holly's death, a tangible sign of the case still being alive came in the form of a reward announcement. Crime Stoppers Buffalo, in coordination with Lockport Police and the DA, offered a reward of up to $7,500 for information leading to the arrest or indictment of Holly's killer. The reward poster emphasized the key facts: that Holly was strangled and set on fire in her East High Street home on October 20th, 2016, and urged anyone with knowledge to come forward. Tips could be submitted anonymously via phone or app. The amount, $7,500, while not huge, signaled that authorities were hoping even a small incentive might shake loose a long-held secret. Oftentimes, such rewards are offered when a case is stalled and needs a boost from the public. By the 5-year anniversary in October 2021, Holly's case was featured in some local unsolved crime segments. One such report described how her family was still waiting and begging for an update from police. Mary Seiler continued to speak out, refusing to let her sister's case be forgotten. "It's been 5 years and we have nothing," she lamented. "Somebody knows something. Please, if you know anything, come forward." The emotional toll on the family was evident. Holidays and milestones passing without Holly and without justice. Law enforcement insists that the case is active, not cold. Detectives have periodically re-interviewed witnesses and persons of interest, checked for any DNA hits, and kept tabs on the main players in this case. The DA, before she left office to become a judge, indicated they were continuing to follow the evidence, and that they only get one chance to charge someone correctly, hinting that they want the case to be rock solid before making any arrest. This suggests that investigators believe they know who likely did it, but they are waiting for either new evidence or a change in circumstances, like perhaps someone willing to testify. As of now, in 2025, the official stance is that Holly Seiler's murder remains an open and unsolved case. The Lockport Police Department periodically states that they are committed to solving it, and that they encourage anyone with information to contact them or Crime Stoppers. The $7,500 reward is presumably still available for credible tips. It's likely that the detectives have a theory of the case that they are working to prove. They may be one piece of evidence away from being able to make an arrest, perhaps waiting on someone's cooperation or a forensic breakthrough, or they may genuinely be stumped and hoping for a lucky tip. To the public, little new information has been revealed since the early years. This is sadly common in such cases. It's frustrating for the public and agonizing for the family, but investigators often hold details back to verify future tips or confessions. Nearly 9 years have passed since the morning Holly Seiler's life was brutally taken, and the case that began with a house fire has yet to deliver justice. For Holly's loved ones, each passing year without answers is a nightmare. Holly's memory, however, remains very much alive. She is remembered not just for the horrific manner in which she died, but for the beautiful person she was in life. A caring mother, a proud Air Force veteran, a hard worker, and a joyous, active soul who loved her family above all. Her children, Crystal and Caleb Jr., lost their mother in the most traumatic way imaginable. They have had to carry on with that heavy loss and the stigma and suspicion swirling around the case. Holly's extended family, her siblings, especially her sister Mary, have become her voice in the public sphere, refusing to let the world forget that Holly's killer remains unidentified and unpunished. Mary has been steadfast in seeking updates from law enforcement, sometimes to the point of frustration. She has implored, "We just want to know what happened and see someone held accountable." Mary has expressed that her sister deserves justice, and the family deserves closure, or as much closure as one can get after such a tragedy. Holly's ex-husband and father of her children, Caleb Bell Sr., also suffered the loss of someone who had been a huge part of his life. Despite the divorce, they shared decades of history and 2 children together. He spoke kindly of Holly after her death, reflecting on her goodness and faith. "It's sad all the way around. There's no winner, nothing but losers," he said, referring to how the tragedy had broken the family. He took solace in the belief that Holly, a woman of faith, is saved, so I know where she went. and he tried to console their daughter with the knowledge that someday, in the next life, they would reunite. These sentiments show a family grasping for comfort amid senseless loss. Friends and former co-workers of Holly's were also deeply affected. Co-workers from the Dunlop plant and fellow veterans who served with her remembered Holly as a reliable and spirited friend. At her funeral, stories were shared of her generosity and humor, how she would organize office potlucks, or how she never forgot anyone's birthday. To them, the idea that someone wanted to harm Holly was almost incomprehensible. That such a caring person could meet such a violent end is a source of ongoing grief and outrage in the community. In Lockport, Holly's case has become one of those lingering unsolved crimes that residents don't easily forget. It's mentioned in local news roundup of cold cases and at Crime Stoppers events. Each year, around October, her name reappears in the press, often alongside a photo of her smiling face, a reminder of the victim behind the headlines. Holly's family has tried to keep her legacy alive by sharing who she was. A woman who served her country, who raised children, who delighted in being a grandmother, and who had many years of life still ahead of her. They want her to be remembered for all those things, not just as a victim. There is still hope that this case will be solved. Advancements in forensic technology, for example DNA analysis techniques, could perhaps one day provide the key, if any usable genetic material was left by the perpetrator. Allegiances and relationships can change. Someone who initially stayed silent might eventually decide to talk, whether out of guilt or for reward, or simply the passage of time softening the fear. Lockport Police and the Niagara County DA certainly have not closed the case, so files remain open and leads, however scant, are being followed. For now, the community and Holly's loved ones are left with unanswered questions and an open wound. Who strangled Holly Seiler in her own bedroom and set her body on fire? Was it the boyfriend who was never charged? Was it her own son, despite the thought being almost too awful to contemplate? Or is the truth something else entirely? The lack of resolution means a killer could likely still be walking free, perhaps even in the same community. Investigators insist that they have not given up on this case, and neither has Holly's family. They hold on to faith that the truth will emerge and the guilty will face consequences. Until that day comes, we are left with a haunting void where answers should be, and as of this episode's recording, the story of Holly Seiler remains unresolved. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm going to keep the end credits brief. I don't have anything planned, I'm just rolling off the cuff here, but it's been a pretty rough month. Been dealing with a lot of illnesses in the Whelan household. My daughter started pre-K, and that led to a whole host of sicknesses. Pretty much everything you could think of. Kids have been sick, I've been sick, wife's been sick. It's been a nightmare. I'm still getting over a little residual bronchitis, which is mostly why I haven't been recording the last couple of weeks, but there were a couple of emergency room visits in the middle there. Yeah, it's just been a total shit show. Anyhow, I'm done complaining. I'm going to keep the end credits brief. Writing and research by Amelia White, hosting and production by myself. If you want to get in touch, please visit the website, unresolved.me. There you can find pretty much anything. Links to transcripts of prior episodes, links to the Patreon, where you can become a patron and help support this podcast. Anyhow, I'm going to go. My throat hurts. I'm going to go have a cough drop, drink some water, the works. Anyhow, you all take care. I'm very happy to be back. We should have another episode next week and more stuff going up on the Patreon soon, including the big climax to the BTK series and another cryptid/paranormal bonus episode. Very exciting. I'll talk to you all later. You have a good day. Bye-bye.